week's episode of Dragon Ball Super, Goku has officially become a Super Saiyan God, and he prepares for his big and ultimate battle with Lord Beerus, the God of Destruction. A battle so epic and massive in its magnitude that it can be called a Battle of Gods. This week's episode of Dragon Ball Super was so freaking classic, and it featured everything that makes Dragon Ball Z amazing. The incredibly cool character designs, the badass fighting choreography, and just the destruction of everything. This week's episode was just round one of Goku versus Beerus, and you know what? I liked it a lot. It wasn't a perfect episode by any stretch of the means, but it was just so classic and nostalgic, and yet all brand new at the same time, and that's a pretty big accomplishment, because this is a continuation of Dragon Ball Z, and it's also an adaptation of Battle of Gods. But unlike Battle of Gods, what I really love about this right here is that we get to see Goku getting used to his brand new God powers, because at first, he doesn't even know how to use them. He's so fast he can't control himself. His Kamehamehas literally part the sea, and he himself can barely land a hit on Lord Beerus. And Lord Beerus doesn't want to be hit by Goku either. He doesn't want it to destroy his pride. Not only that, but I've also learned in this week's episode that Lord Beerus is a big fan of the backhand. Basically, it's just him sort of condescending to his opponents. Despite that, he still has some amazing fighting abilities, and it's still scary to know that he's barely even using any of his power whatsoever, while Goku is still trying to power up and throw everything at him. But little by little, as the episode is going on, Goku is starting to get a little bit of the upper hand, and it's not until this one moment about halfway through the episodes where Goku finally decks him in the face is where things start to get serious. Because Beerus just uses this big destructive ball of power that he throws at Goku, and Goku has to block it and throw it away from him, and it just completely destroys this landscape in the distance. We've seen mountains explode and stuff like that, but this was like 10 A-bombs just went off at once. It was pretty damned awesome. The best thing about the battle between Goku and Beerus, though, is the fact that these two characters are very similar in many senses. They have a lot of pride behind themselves, and if they get hit by a certain attack, they want to return the favor, so to speak, and that definitely happens in this week's episode, because if you guys remember back on King Kai's planet, Beerus just wiped the floor with Goku. He completely destroyed him and made a fool of him, basically by just like tapping him on the shoulder and flicking him in the face. And Goku decides to do that in this week's episode, however, his power is just not up to par, and it basically turns into this nice little comedy scene. But what's really crazy about it is that he actually draws a little bit of blood from Beerus. When he actually tries to punch him, Beerus just barely dodges it, but he still catches a little bit of the attack, so he's got a scratch on his face, and then Goku decides to flick him right in the head, which leaves a nice big red bump. But Beerus can actually use his tail in battle, and he ends up just slapping Goku away. And I'm really like that aspect, because in Battle of Gods, he actually didn't use his tail all that much, and I'd like to see him use more of that in his martial arts style, which is very unique and clearly the most devastating thing that Goku has ever run into, and that's saying a lot because his martial arts skills pay the frickin' Dragon Ball bills. So yeah, basically this week's episode was just a short sparring match. It was basically Goku learning to use his god powers so that him and Beerus could have their real battle, which is going to start in next week's episode. And if you look at the preview for next week's episode, it looks freaking awesome. So I cannot wait to see what they're going to do with that and what new scenes they're going to add to this fight. What's the rundown on this week's episode of Dragon Ball Super? This one was pretty freaking awesome, and it wasn't even a perfect episode, and a lot of that, I think, had to do with some of the pacing issues. And I'm going to put most of the blame on the Pilaf gang. These guys just keep showing up and destroying the just flow of the show. This whole episode was pretty good for the most part, but every single time they showed up on screen, I'm just sort of bored with the Pilaf gang, because their story isn't going anywhere, the Dragon Balls are gone, they're basically there just to be goofy and hang out with Whis, which is honestly kind of funny, but they don't do that much with it. Basically, they just have a picnic on the ship, and that's about it. Hell, the episode even ends in a cartoon-styled fashion, focusing on the Pilaf gang. But you're not even going to remember any of that, because this week's episode is all about Goku versus Beerus, and I think it was handled pretty well. There was a lot of impact from their attacks. I especially love how when it first began, when Goku's just throwing his punches and his kicks, just the impact you feel, the sound effects and the way they animate it really make them seem incredibly powerful. And I also really loved when he used that Kamehameha, just the distinctive difference when what it looks like when he's actually a Super Saiyan God, how it has the lightning crackling around it with a little bit of red energy, but still mostly blue, and then it just flies into the ocean and just just parts the entire sea, and this thing just keeps going until it just erupts into the sky in a beam of pure epicness. Hell yeah, this is just round one, guys! There was also a subplot from the movie that they decided to bring back in, which is when Bulma and all their friends get into a big Capsule Corp ship and they decide to follow the fight, which basically just leads to them getting knocked around and flying in the ocean, and just more reaction shots from a lot of these side characters. Something that I thought was actually really funny about this episode is there was this one scene with King Kai where he is just freaking out, running around his planet, and the reason I think this is funny is because Goku has always been like King Kai's best student, but at the same time, King Kai has always been afraid that he was going to misuse his power, or he was going to have so much power that he could potentially just destroy everything, or this could possibly lead to him being defeated with his friends and family being killed. But he's always freaked out when he felt his regular key power. Now that he's a god, he cannot control his shit, and he's just constantly running around his planet in circles, screaming without saying anything. It's just really funny because he's a god himself, so he can actually sense how ridiculous Goku is when he starts to power up that first time. And a reminder, guys, this is still just round one. There's going to be a lot more to this fight, and I can't wait to see if there's going to be any twists, which is going to involve those other god characters that we've seen in the intro of the show, and those are the guys who have also appeared in the manga version of Dragon Ball Super. So at the end of the day, this is still a pretty great episode of Dragon Ball Super. Not perfect. Some of the pacing issues were there with the Pilaf gang. You might love them, you might hate them. Some of the artwork and animation was just okay, but for the most part, this was a consistently fun, action-packed, impactful episode of Dragon Ball Super, which was focusing on Goku versus Beerus, and that's exactly what we want to see in the Battle of Gods arc. Beerus himself is continuing to be one of my favorite characters from the series. He's very funny, playful, but also very scary at the same time, and the fact that he's not exactly a hero and not exactly a villain makes him a really complex character for the series, and that's something that I think Dragon Ball really needed. That and just the fact that this is just a lot of fun. So Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT fans, check out this series. You might see something you like. So yeah, I'm gonna give this week's episode a 4 out of 5. Before you guys leave today, I want to hear your thoughts about this week's episode of Dragon Ball Super. Please tell me in the comment section below, what did you think about the first round between Goku and Lord Beerus? Did you have a favorite scene from this week's episode? What do you hope to see from the rest of Dragon Ball Super? Thank you guys for watching my review. Make sure to like it and share it with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can see all of our latest anime and manga reviews and our weekly podcast show, The Powerful Nerdcast. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby!